No, we support Diddy. What's up? We the supporters.
We've been anticipating it for months, and it finally happened. Charges filed against Sean Diddy Combs, alleging coercion, violence, all wrapped up in a RICO charge. And while a few are still showing their support, the evidence is piling up against one of the top-selling rap artists of all time. We are taking a closer look at the best evidence the prosecution has that could send Sean Combs to prison for the rest of his life. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs was led out of a federal courtroom in New York on Tuesday by marshals, uncuffed but headed straight for jail. He spent the night in the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center out in Brooklyn. It's a notorious jail that has had some pretty bad history of violence, suicides. Sex offender Jeffrey Epstein being held there prior to his trial when he was found dead in his cell in 2019. Actually, interestingly enough, Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, was actually asked yesterday if he was worried about Combs' safety given the Jeffrey Epstein situation. Essentially said, look, we have to strive to keep everyone protected. This is just the way the criminal justice system works. Interesting question, nonetheless. By the way, a form filed with the court on Tuesday afternoon lists Sean Combs as the defendant, and then under bail disposition, detention, risk of flight/danger, it has an X mark next to it. Also checked is the box next to defendant arraigned, pleads not guilty. Now, we've gone over the 14-page indictment filed against Combs in the Southern District of New York, plus letters regarding bail sent to the judge by both the prosecution and the defense. You can check out the Sidebar episode that we did there. We kind of did a deep dive. You can check it out on the Law&Crime Network YouTube page. But right now, what we want to talk about is something else. So the documents, what they do is they give us a better idea of what Homeland Security agents found inside of Combs' homes in Los Angeles and Miami when they were raided back in March, as well as other evidence that they have collected during the course of this investigation. The Southern District of New York is well known for being one of the top courts in the country. According to statistics from the United States Sentencing Commission in fiscal year 2023, the SDNY had more than 1,000 cases, and of those cases, 94% of the defendants ended up taking a plea, while only 6% chose to take their case to trial. And the court's conviction rate is reported to be 95%. So in other words, if the Southern District of New York prosecutors file charges against you, it's safe to assume they've done their homework and think that they have a really solid case. So the U.S. Attorney here was asked during a news conference on Tuesday why the charges against Combs were brought in New York instead of Florida or California.
Well, I'm biased. I'm the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. I think that we have an outstanding track record of bringing some of the most impactful, sprawling, complex, difficult sex trafficking, human trafficking, labor trafficking, you name it. The Southern District of New York can do it, and so we're very proud of that. And so the scope and complexity of this investigation isn't something that we ran from, it's something that we embrace, and we will continue to do that.
Okay, I want to talk about some of the strongest pieces of evidence right now against Sean Combs, the rapper-producer. And to do that, I want to bring in two special guests. I'm joined by Colin Schmidt, retired FBI agent, CEO of Kronos Investigations, and Robin Nunn, trial attorney and federal litigator. It's great to have you both here. So first, Colin, what is your reaction to Combs' arrest and Combs' indictment?
Well, I think I was on one of your shows at the very outset of this when the search warrant occurred, and I was asked, okay, why didn't they arrest him and indict him right on the spot? And my statement then was they're putting their case together because he's such a public figure and he has so many resources. They want to make sure they get it right. So when I saw this indictment, as well as the detention memo that the prosecutor put over, it looks to me like they really, really did their homework, and they're really making sure that these charges stick.
So, Robin, what do you think? Because this is interesting. You heard Damian Williams say they're confident their office should handle it. You know, there were raids in California and Florida. There seemed to be a connection to New York, saying that this criminal organization, this criminal enterprise, was based or had headquarters in the Southern District. What do you make of this case being spearheaded by them, and what do you make of the indictment that we saw?
Yeah, there are no stronger prosecution unit than the Southern District of New York. They have a special unit that is designed to take cases such as these sex trafficking, RICO organized crime rings. So I think Damian Williams is stating it pretty clearly and correctly that the Southern District of New York would be on anyone's top list of units of government agencies that would be able to handle something like this with a celebrity and the complexities and the number of witnesses, because it is such a elite and heavy conviction centered prosecution unit.
The indictment and the bail letter that was put forward by the prosecution, serious accusations. I mean, disturbing to say the least. And even though we don't know all the evidence, and we're going to get into some of it, they seem to be very confident in their case. But it also, we didn't know how many victims there were. It seems that one of the charges is at least with respect to just one victim. Racketeering cases can be complicated. But saying that, do you feel that this is a strong case based on the allegations put forward?
Yeah, this is one of the strongest sex trafficking cases that I've ever seen. While the indictment was not as detailed as I was expected, and there were some allegations that I suspected might be made that were not, such as, underage victims or, perhaps murder or, things like that. This was focused enough and had enough meat that I feel like it'll be very difficult, to sort of get out of these allegations. It seems like they've interviewed a number of witnesses. I think they said at least 50 victims and witnesses that have already been sort of interviewed and have agreed to cooperate in this, and I'm sure that there are many more, and they're even looking for more. So I think that they feel pretty strongly that they've put together a strong package, and I think they're pretty confident.
Do you agree the way he was arrested? This became a big issue yesterday. He came to New York, was at the Park Hyatt. He and his attorneys knew he was going to be hit with charges. In fact, his attorney said to the media before the indictment was unsealed, we anticipate racketeering and sex trafficking charges. But yet, despite that, they took issue with the way that he was arrested and he was apprehended and taken into custody. I think he wanted to surrender himself. Do you disagree or agree with the way that it was handled?
I'm a little agnostic on that. The bottom line is he's accused of very, very serious crimes. I mean, there was allegedly harm done to people. And if they want to go out and arrest him and do it in that manner, that's their prerogative. And frankly, that's their right. So for them to say, well, he was going to turn himself, he was going to do this, we don't know what he's going to do, because right after or near the time of when this first search warrant was done at his place in LA, apparently he got on a plane and flew down to Florida. So he's already shown a propensity to move when there's pressure. So I think the New York authorities thought, well, we got to make sure we get this right. We don't want to take any chances of a flight from this guy, because if they try to track him down in a foreign country, it would be an absolute nightmare.
By the way, I was talking last night about this, and I was asked, why didn't he just leave the country? Right? He knew the charges were coming. Why didn't he just leave the country? And I said, well, the authorities could have arrested him immediately on the spot if they knew. But would that mean that they were tracking him beforehand? They knew when he was boarding a flight? And he's been moving around, right? He hasn't just stayed in one place during the course of this investigation. What would have prevented him from getting on the plane, having a flight plan for, I don't know, let's say California, let's say Colorado, let's say New York, and just saying, keep going and go to some country that doesn't have extradition? What prevented him from doing that? And what would be the way authorities could track him and stop him from doing that?
Well, to do that, it takes a lot of moving parts, because he's going to have to get pilots that are going to participate in that, conspiracy to flee. The pilots also have to file a flight plan. They also have to pick a country to go to that's going to be friendly to his issues. That's not going to extradite him. And he also, when that plan is filed, then he has to go through a process with Customs and Border Protection to be, in terms of being able to go to the next country. So I'm sure he had considered that, and I'm sure he took the advice of his lawyers and decided not to do that, because if he had fled, then this would have amplified, and then the full force of the United States government would have come down on tracking him down and bringing him back.
Do you think they were tracking him, though? Like, not necessarily like they had a surveillance team watching him at all times, but do you think investigators, do you think federal authorities kind of knew what he was doing?
Well, I think based upon the number of people who have come forward in terms of the indictment, I think they had people that were likely reporting on him, reporting on his actions and his movements, as well as the fact that they put so many resources to this. It would be reasonable for them to be watching his phones, watching his computer activity, and frankly having more people around him who are informing on him and his behavior.
I want to go into some of the evidence now and talk about what could be the strongest pieces. And to be clear, it's not entirely evident what the prosecution has, what people said to them, what the physical evidence is, what the digital evidence is, but let's go through it. So the prosecution says that many of the accusations against Combs can be corroborated by witnesses. And this is mentioned several times in the prosecution's letter to Judge Robin Tarnowski, where they were arguing against bail. For example, on page 2 of that letter, it says, quote, "At least a dozen witnesses will confirm that they personally observed the defendant's violence towards women and or the injury sustained by women at the defendant's hand." Then on page 11, it says, "Dozens of victims and witnesses have provided detailed, credible, and corroborated information against the defendant." Page 13, quote, "As to witnesses to date, the government has conducted interviews with over 50 victims and witnesses, many of whom saw or experienced the defendant's abuse. The government only expects that number to continue to grow, given that the investigation, which is now public, is ongoing." So, Colin, how does law enforcement even go about this? Finding these people, conducting these interviews? What do you think that's about?
Well, 2 points here. Number one, he corroborated his behavior himself with that video that came out of him assaulting his girlfriend in the hotel, which was somewhat hard to watch as a father of a daughter and somebody who's been in law enforcement. Secondly, you talk to one person, and the most basic question you ask at the beginning, middle, or the end of the interview: is there anybody else? Oh yeah, I have this girlfriend that also suffered this type of behavior from him. And then you go to that person. And oh yeah, I got this person. I get this. So it ends up being a string or a network of people, because frankly, these women are most likely associates with each other or know each other, and they may even be close friends, and they've been in the circle that was basically targeted by Sean P. Diddy Combs, as well as the people around him that were assisting him in this behavior.
And we're going to also get to this a little bit when we talk about the digital evidence, but how do authorities corroborate what they're being told? Is it they hear a consistent pattern over speaking to multiple people? If 5 people say the same thing, okay, unless they coordinated this, it looks like it might be true, or it looks like there might be probable cause here. Or is it also looking at their phones, looking at other evidence that was collected during the course of the raids and saying that matches up to their story? I imagine the fact that, I said this before and I'll say it again, the idea that anybody can sue anybody. I mean, you're not supposed to file frivolous lawsuits, but it seems on the outset that you have prosecutors who are believing the accounts of these accusers, at the very least, it seems, Cassie Ventura, and filing criminal charges based on those accounts. So it seems that, authorities are believing what's being told, and they have the corroboration. It's not just the accounts of these people, but other evidence to back it up. Now, again, their stories might be similar, but I guess the question is, how do authorities corroborate what they're being told?
Well, the first thing, pattern is corroboration. So if you have 50 people saying the behavior was the same pattern, or he took the same actions, and he's been accused. We don't know until he's seen his day in court what really happened, but that's the first level of corroboration. The second thing is, apparently they seized videos from his house in California, and that's going to be extreme corroboration right there, because it's going to play out right in front of them. And then the third piece of this is the digital evidence, is the text messages, is the communications that he had with these women, based upon, and every one of them is likely saved those text messages on their phones and were able to give screenshots to the authorities. So it appears to me that the evidence is overwhelming. However, we're only going to know if it truly is overwhelming, once he has his day in court.
I think it is interesting how many people were apparently interviewed. And we're not entirely sure if all the people who filed lawsuits against Sean Combs are the main accusers, but it seems to me, at least from Cassie Ventura's point of view, it seems that prosecutors have built their case based on those allegations. And I said this yesterday, and I say it today. It's one thing for somebody to sue somebody else, right? We have a lower standard. They shouldn't file frivolous lawsuits, but you have to, filing a civil lawsuit is very different than criminal charges. For prosecutors to believe these accounts and seemingly have it, people who are corroborating one another, there's a pattern there, but also maybe corroborated by the digital evidence, that is very significant that you have civil lawsuits that may have triggered a criminal prosecution.
I think that's right. I think that the civil complaints, which we saw, there were many, definitely got the ball rolling. But I would say that it was the video of Cassie, that violent incident that we saw in that hotel lobby that I guess came out of the blue, that really was what I think put the nail in the coffin. That was actually cited to in the indictment as something that they planned to use as evidence, and actually I believe led to the enhancements that we saw on what they're seeking as far as prison time.
And essentially, he could be looking at life in prison if he's convicted across the board. I am curious, is it a clear case for you when you hear the different accounts? Because they're saying there's a lot there. They're saying he operated a criminal organization that engaged in forced labor, kidnapping, arson, violence. They're saying that it was a common purpose to protect Diddy, to satisfy his sexual desires, to make money. There's a lot thrown out there. Is this a tough case to ultimately prosecute? And then you have the sex trafficking charge. You have the transportation for purposes of prostitution charge. Is this a tough case to prosecute? Is it a clear case to prosecute?
Yeah, I think it's always a tough case, right? I think that a lot of work and evidence has gone into leading up to now in terms of bringing this indictment, in terms of having that initial hearing and sort of having him arrested and bringing these charges. However, I do think that Diddy has very competent legal counsel. I think that they have seen this probably coming for some time. I think that while this case feels like R. Kelly all over again to me, where you obviously have, sort of a video of an underage person, that was involved and introduced, I think that this has, sort of samplings of that, but I assume that the defense is going to say that he did not do this, right? That this wasn't an organized crime syndicate that the prosecutors are accusing him of. This is a group of friends having a sex party. Yeah, it's not what you want to necessarily hear about. No one really possibly, likes it, but it is what it is. People like Diddy, people wanted to be around him, and they allow themselves to be sort of manipulated sometimes into perhaps doing things that sound unsavory when heard in the news. I think that is the crux of what the defense's sort of argument will be, and I guess the question will be, what do you believe?
Continue on with this. When agents ended up searching Combs' homes back in March, they left with a lot of evidence. There were weapons, both seemingly legal and illegal. U.S. Attorney Damian Williams showed photographs of some of them during that news conference.
Here are some of the items that we recovered during the searches. As you can see here, this is a drum magazine, large capacity, and it contains, I believe, 59 rounds. I mentioned as well, we recovered 3 AR-15s. This is a close-up shot of one of the AR-15s, and you can see right here, the serial number has been thoroughly defaced. Another picture of more ammunition and parts of 2 AR-15s right there.
Okay, so first let me ask you, why would someone deface weapons like this?
Well, to hide the ownership of the weapon, and so or the origin of the weapon. So depending on where he got it, that he may be defacing it, or whoever defaced it. So if that weapon had been used in a crime prior to him possessing it. So that's one of the number one reasons, as well as be able to keep transferring that weapon amongst other people, because there's no way of tracing that weapon.
Were you surprised that he wasn't charged specifically with those gun charges? Remember, so it's part of the overall racketeering case. It's an example of a criminal organization. but he wasn't charged specifically, which my understanding is a federal crime, possession of a weapon that has an obliterated serial number. I think the suspect in the second attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump has been hit with that charge. Were you surprised that Combs was not hit with that?
No, because it's coming. I believe they're gonna supersede with this indictment with more charges. That's generally they start with this one, kind of see how it fleshes out, and then they'll determine what they need to actually add on depending on how the evidence starts playing out amongst the people that are going to start coming forward, because they're probably looking not only to corroborate the human trafficking, but they also want to corroborate all this possession of all these firearms.
Right. And look, a little bit more about evidence here, talking about strong evidence. Apparently, investigators collected a lot of electronic data, which can be crucial in a case like this. We talked about it, but the prosecution writes in their bail letter, the electronic evidence is similarly vast. The government has sought and obtained numerous search warrants for such evidence, in addition to obtaining evidence voluntarily from certain victims and witnesses. Setting aside devices seized in connection with the government's arrest, the government has obtained over 90 cell phones, laptops, cloud storage accounts, as well as over 30 other electronic and storage devices, such as hard drives, thumb drives, cameras, and a surveillance system. This electronic data comes from the defendant himself, as well as co-conspirators, victims, and witnesses, and chronicles much of the defendant's criminal activity as it occurs. And the government also sent out subpoenas to all sorts of companies and associates connected to Combs. It says, quote, finally, the evidence includes records obtained pursuant to over 300 grand jury subpoenas and other voluntary productions. These materials come from over 100 entities and individuals, including communications providers, tech companies, social media companies, banks, and other financial institutions, airlines, hotels, car services, and other travel-related companies, escort services, and even the defendant's companies and wealth management firm. So, that is a lot. What can we expect?
Well, and I believe the Homeland Security investigations are leading this investigation. And frankly, they're very good at what they do. So, and I'm sure they have a team or even a task force looking at this, because the alleged criminal conspiracy is so vast and there's so many victims. So what I would expect is, once they get through this evidence, the evidence, it appears to be overwhelming, because you're going to see all the text messages, all of his statements that are going to incriminate himself with all of these people. And frankly, this has been going on for so long. I think there was a comfort level that he had, or his circle had, where they thought they weren't going to get caught. They could just continue to do this. And then frankly, that the hammer fell. So there's so much here that if there was going to be a trial, it would likely be something that would take months in terms of presenting all of this evidence.
And by the way, they say that the investigation is ongoing. Is it possible that investigators are still combing through this material? It's been a while. It's been since March since they did those raids. But remember, they interviewed people. They spoke to these alleged victims. That could have been going on before or after the raids. So, I mean, do you think they're still combing through this evidence? When they say the investigation is ongoing, I think that means more people to come forward. How does it work?
Absolutely. They're going to continue to comb through that evidence. And then once they come through that evidence, that might lead to more search warrants or more subpoenas or more court orders to get cloud-based information, as well as the fact that more people are going to be coming forward, and then they're going to lead them to getting more electronic evidence. So this thing is going to go on until there's a trial or there's a plea agreement.
And I'll just finish up with this last part, that the prosecutors, they sent to the judge before the bail hearing this attachment, Exhibit A, which was the surveillance video of Combs allegedly attacking his then girlfriend Cassie Ventura in a Los Angeles hotel. And Ventura was allegedly attempting to leave the hotel after a alleged freak-off session where she was apparently drugged and forced to have sex with male prostitutes. And then Combs comes running down the hallway in a towel, throws her to the ground. That's the allegation from the video. Now, the government says that this very disturbing footage is proof of Combs' temper, his violent nature. It shows how far he will go when he doesn't get what he wants. In the beginning of her complaint, it mentions how Combs is a rapper, a record executive, how he rose to prominence in the entertainment industry. And then she explains how in 2022, when he won the Lifetime Achievement Award at the BET Awards, He called out Ventura in his speech. And also Cassie for holding me down in the dark times. Love. But then the suit says, quote, the truth, however, is that Cassie, Miss Cassandra Ventura, was held down by Mr. Combs and endured over a decade of his violent behavior and disturbed demands. For Miss Ventura, the dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. And it then lists a number of, quote, violent and unlawful acts, which we're going to get into, but it's important to start from the beginning with this. So in the complaint, she explains how she met Combs when she was 19 years old back in 2005. He was apparently 37. He signed her to his record label Bad Boy Records as an artist. And from there, she claims that Combs, her boss, and who she describes as, quote, one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry, lured her into a fast-paced, drug-fueled lifestyle and into a romantic relationship with him where he, quote, asserted complete control over her personal and professional life, thereby ensuring her inability to escape his hold. She claims that he provided unprecedented avenues for success for the aspiring artist, but in return demanded obedience, loyalty, and silence. And that is key. That is a common characteristic in sex trafficking claims, the promise of something valuable to force someone to engage in sexual activity. And there are more references to this where Combs, according to Ventura, would buy her designer clothing, pay for lavish vacations for them, bought her a car. So I want you to keep that in mind as we talk more about this. Now the complaint goes on to say, quote, within a year of signing with Bad Boy Records, Mr. Combs became deeply entrenched in Miss Ventura's life, almost immediately asserting possession and control over her and inserting himself into all aspects of her career and her personal life, and expanding upon that concept of control and ownership, as Ventura defines this. The complaint also states that Combs started renting her an apartment that was within walking distance of his place. And the complaint says, quote, Mr. Combs also became deeply involved in Miss Ventura's personal life, with his personal staff attending to Miss Ventura's day-to-day travel and other needs, including medical care. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs had Miss Ventura's personal medical records sent directly to his email address. For instance, when Miss Ventura began experiencing memory loss, potentially due to excessive drug use and/or head injuries caused by Mr. Combs' beatings, her MRI results were provided directly to Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs also repeatedly arranged for his staff to drive Miss Ventura to certain doctor's appointments. By the way, that is alluded to in Combs' criminal indictment as well, because in the indictment it states, quote, Combs maintained control over his victims through, among other things, physical violence, promises of career opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victim's appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances. Now, by the way, according to Ventura, Combs pursued her and began this romantic relationship with her, even though he had been dating Kim Porter, and Ventura apparently had a boyfriend. And she explained that she would acquiesce to his requests and demands, including her taking a copious amount of drugs at his insistence, because she was afraid. She was afraid of the repercussions for her and her career. The complaint says, quote, compounding this all-encompassing intrusion into her life, Mr. Combs secured his control over the young and impressionable Miss Ventura by introducing her to a drug-fueled lifestyle that kept her complacent and compliant. Now I want to get into the physical and sexual abuse allegations. That's a main component of this case. So the complaint lists out many alleged incidents. For example, it states, quote, Mr. Combs would violently beat Miss Ventura, leaving bruises on her body. After every instance in which he beat Miss Ventura, Mr. Combs used his money and power to orchestrate extensive efforts to hide the evidence of his abuse, including by hiding Miss Ventura in hotels for days at a time to let her bruises heal. It goes on that in one such instance, after a party with Jay-Z, Mr. Combs beat Miss Ventura repeatedly in an Escalade, including by kicking and hitting her. There's another instance that says that in January of 2009, after Mr. Combs learned that Miss Ventura spoke to another music manager at a party in Los Angeles, he became enraged. It goes on to state that in the car leaving the club, Mr. Combs beat Miss Ventura, pushing her into a corner of the vehicle and stomping on her face. Now, to be clear, we don't know if any of these specific instances of abuse will make their way into this criminal case, whether it's only respect to the freak-offs, because again, the indictment really focuses on that and not necessarily individual isolated moments of abuse, but we'll wait and see. Now, for anyone following this story, in this complaint, in this lawsuit, is the first time that we heard about this infamous March 2016 incident at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. This is where Ventura claims that a drunk Sean Combs punched her in the face, and as she tried to escape the hotel room, he follows her into the hallway, yells at her, grabs her, and throws glass vases. And we all saw this episode with our own eyes when CNN published video of this encounter a few months back, seeing Combs in a towel allegedly beating Ventura in that hallway, kicking her, dragging her, an episode that Combs apologized for on Instagram just 2 days after that video was released. And this was also referenced in the criminal indictment as well. It's actually one of the more specific instances that is described. And as Ventura and prosecutors allege, Combs attempted to bribe a security guard to keep all of this quiet, and that Combs and his team may have purchased that surveillance footage so that no one would see it. Now, going back to why this was mentioned in the indictment and what was said in this complaint, according to prosecutors and according to Ventura, at that hotel room, that 2016 incident, she was allegedly escaping a freak-off, which again is at the center of this criminal indictment against Combs. And it's the first time, I will tell you, I ever heard of it. I ever heard of a freak-off was in this lawsuit. These voyeuristic sexual performances where Combs would allegedly force Ventura to engage in sex acts with other men, mostly male sex workers. As her complaint explains, Combs would allegedly demand these freak-offs or FOs at random times, and she was expected to find the place and hire the men. These would happen, according to Ventura, frequently at all different locations, including prominent hotels. The FOs would get so wild that there's an allegation that there was damage sustained at the hotel rooms. The complaint says, quote, sometimes Mr. Combs would pay to fly male sex workers to his location, including to multiple cities in the United States as well as abroad. He required Miss Ventura and his staff to help him make these arrangements. Mr. Combs' assistants would help to set up the FOs, including by setting up the hotel suites with baby oil and Astroglide. Mr. Combs always supplied Miss Ventura and the sex workers with copious amounts of drugs before and during the FOs. Miss Ventura was given ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and alcohol in excessive amounts during FOs, which allowed her to disassociate during these horrific encounters. It became commonplace to get IV fluids in the days after an FO to recover from the excessive substances pushed upon her. And to be clear, according to Ventura, this is not something she wanted to do. In the complaint, it says frequently her anxiety before an FO would become so great that she would become physically ill, sometimes to the point of vomiting. While kneeling over the toilet, Mr. Combs would shame her into performing for him, eventually forcing her to get up and proceed with the encounter. She knew firsthand that telling Mr. Combs that she did not want to engage in FOs was met with anger and violence. In addition, any suggestion that Ms. Ventura would refuse the FO or otherwise report Mr. Combs' abuse was met with ultimatums by Mr. Combs, who would say that Ms. Ventura would not go to the police because she had a lot to lose. Now, not only is that consistent with what is alleged in the criminal indictment, the fact pattern as laid out by prosecutors, but that specifically is what accounts for her sex trafficking claim in this lawsuit and the racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution charges that he faces. Ventura alleges in her complaint that Combs would pleasure himself during these FOs and also film the encounters. And get this, after she claimed she tried to delete photos and videos of these FOs, Combs told her he's got the videos. And in fact, quote, on one occasion, he sat next to her on a flight and made her watch a video she thought she had deleted, reinforcing her inability to escape and the immense power he held over her. It goes on to state that over the years, she again and again tried to escape his tight hold over her life. Every time she hid, Mr. Combs' vast network of corporations and affiliated entities found her, and those who worked for Mr. Combs' companies implored her to return to him. Many went as far as to explicitly state that her failure to return to Mr. Combs would hinder her success in the entertainment industry. Again, that goes to this racketeering conspiracy. It's not Combs acting alone. There's a team, there's an enterprise. That's what the allegation is put forward by prosecutors. Now, later on in the complaint, she explains how by 2017, 2018, she wanted to leave Sean Combs. And she says how at one point they went to dinner, seemingly to try to talk about ending the relationship. But at the end of the night, he allegedly forces himself into her apartment and rapes her as she says no. Now, if you didn't think all of these allegations were shocking enough, and by the way, remember, this was the first lawsuit. This started it all. This was the first time we were hearing these shocking allegations for the first time. But there were other parts of this complaint where she mentions other high-profile individuals that is, again, shocking. For instance, she explains how in 2011, during a rough patch in her relationship with Sean Combs, she started a relationship with rapper Kid Cudi. And the following year, she claims, quote, Mr. Combs told Miss Ventura that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car and that he wanted to ensure that Kid Cudi was home with his friends when it happened. And around that time, Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway. And guess what? This is a part of the criminal indictment. As part of the racketeering conspiracy charge where you're showing this criminal enterprise, prosecutors list out a number of alleged underlying crimes committed by the enterprise members. Included in there is arson. This seems to be with respect to the Kid Cudi car incident. And prosecutors, in a following subsequent letter to the court, had indicated they have evidence, fire reports, to back this up. But continuing on with other high-profile people mentioned in Ventura's lawsuit, what about Combs' longtime rival, music executive Suge Knight? He's mentioned. The complaint reads, on one occasion when Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura were using drugs together in his home, one of the security staff barged in and announced that Suge Knight was spotted at Mel's Drive-In Diner in Los Angeles. Mr. Combs began to get dressed, retrieved multiple guns from a safe, and ran out of his home to where he believed Mr. Knight was dining. Miss Ventura became terrified and began to cry. The complaint goes on to say that on at least 2 occasions, Mr. Combs demanded that Miss Ventura hold Mr. Combs' gun in her purse. There was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous. As Combs now faces these criminal charges, there is a separate legal team that is dealing with the multiple civil lawsuits that are pending against him. And one of those complaints was filed by a woman named Grace O'Markey. So O'Markey was apparently a steward working aboard a yacht that was rented by Sean Combs in December of 2022 for a holiday celebration with his family, when she claims she was sexually assaulted by Christian Combs. And within weeks of Sean Combs' homes being raided back in March by federal agents, O'Markey filed a civil complaint against Christian and named his father, Sean Combs, in the suit as well for allegedly facilitating this assault to occur. Now, through her attorney, O'Markey put out a statement after Sean Combs was arrested saying, quote, the long-awaited federal arrest of Sean Combs is the first step for our clients receiving justice. We leave the criminal aspect of this case in the hands of the people and justice system. As for the civil cases, we await our time for the facts to reveal themselves and seek the justice our clients deserve. It goes on to say, we also anticipate more victims coming forward. We knew this was coming. The evidence is very clear, and it was only a matter of time. This is an important step towards justice for all of Mr. Combs' victims, including my clients. Justice will prevail. So what is the status of this civil case, and what impact could it have, if any, on the criminal charges that Sean Combs now faces? Well, to discuss that, I want to bring in criminal defense attorney Natalie Whittingham-Burrell to talk more about this. Natalie, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
Hi, Jesse. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So first, let me start from a basic point of law. How much do civil cases that might be alleging similar conduct as criminal charges, how much does a result in a civil case affect a criminal case?
Not at all. So it doesn't affect the criminal case. The jury in a criminal case is supposed to remain fair and unbiased and only consider the facts that they're hearing in the courtroom. As far as the judge is concerned, if the judge is going to be imposing a sentence because the jury found the person guilty, the judge should be considering what happened in the courtroom. And usually they don't take into consideration civil liability. I've heard many judges say, I know that there's a concurrent case in the civil courts. We're going to let that play out. This is separate and apart from that. And the reason being is that it's a different burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt versus preponderance of the evidence. And so for that reason, you can't really let what happens in the civil context infiltrate the criminal context, because the trier of fact is determining something different.
Before I make these connections, because there could be overlap here, there is the possibility that, and I'll get to this in a second, whether or not Grace O'Markey may be cooperating with federal investigators, whether any piece of that evidence could come into the federal case. We'll get to that in a second. But what did you make of the statement from Grace O'Markey's legal team after Sean Combs was arrested?
I see. So what they're saying basically is that this is opening up a it's kind of opening up for more victims to come forward. And I think that's really what it's all about as far as the civil case is concerned. So more people might feel emboldened, like, look, there is a criminal case here. This means that what happened to me is valid and I am free to speak out about it, right? They'd always been waiting for it. I guess, if the feds had investigated and nothing had come of it, people might have felt less inclined to come forward. So as far as emboldening potential victims, yes, the criminal case would impact the psyche of a person who's potentially a victim of Sean Combs. Yes.
Let me ask you this. The statement where they're saying, this isn't a surprise. We expected this to happen. Now, that could be because we were all seeing what was happening play out. We knew that there were raids. There was reports about a grand jury being impaneled. There was reports that Sean Combs was the target of an investigation. Do you think that we're not surprised because we saw everything everybody else said? Or do you think we're not surprised because Grace O'Markey may be cooperating with the government as a witness in the federal criminal case?
Right, I see what you mean. It could be that. There's really no way to know whether or not she's cooperating. Because like with Cassie, you saw the details that Cassie alleged in her lawsuit being played out in the actual formal indictment and the letters that were written by the state to try and encourage the court to hold on to Sean Combs and not release him. Whereas I don't see a lot of specific detail overlap with what O'Markey is alleging, other than the fact that what she alleges confirms and supports what Cassie has been saying. It's interesting. I think what she says, O'Markey, more confirms and report what's in the Little Rod lawsuit, which is these things that were happening on yachts, which isn't really detailed in the criminal case.
And I'm going to get to that connection in a minute. I guess just more generally speaking, and this is interesting because the way the prosecutors filed these charges against Sean Combs, there's not a lot of independent sexual assault claims, right? They've really focused it more on these freak-offs, these sexual performances, and the idea that the allegations are that he centered these sexual performances that were directed by Combs, that he would force people to be a part of them, he would transport people to be a part of them, he would drug people to engage in these freak-offs. And do you think that's strategic, that the prosecutors are not saying, we know that he's facing a number of sexual assault lawsuits, or his son might be facing a sexual lawsuit. We're not going to include that as kind of separate charges, or even evidence of the freak-offs, because what she's alleging, and we'll get to what she's alleging, she's not alleging a freak-off happened with her, right? And I'm thinking that federal prosecutors are very specific for a reason here, right?
Right. They're very specific for a reason because, first of all, you made a very good distinction. What Miss O'Markey is alleging is against Christian Combs, Sean Combs' son, Diddy's son, not against Diddy himself as far as the actual essay is concerned. However, what it does do is kind of lay a foundation for the context in which they're saying these freak-offs happen. And so I think by leaving their indictment more general, they have left it open for more evidence to be introduced at trial, because they could easily say, well, this is relevant to the environment in which these freak-offs took place. This is why people would be afraid to come forward if they're facing the threat of, financial ruin, sexual assault, or being shunned in the entertainment community. And so for all of those reasons, even though this isn't specifically named in the criminal case, these actions by Markey, which makes complete sense because Christian Combs is not a defendant in the criminal case, it certainly does add to context. And so now I could see now on the defense side them wanting to do something akin to a bill of particulars, where they want to get more information from how actually the prosecution intends to prove this case, because they've left it so open that pretty much any of those bad acts could.
And so you're kind of laying the groundwork for how possibly Grace O'Markey could testify in a federal case, but there's a lot of things that need to happen before that. So I want to talk a little bit more about this. So we have Christian King Combs, 26-year-old model rapper, third oldest son of Sean Combs, who's one of 3 children that Combs shares with the late model Kim Porter. She died in 2018. And we go back to the raids that happened in Los Angeles and Miami back in March. Combs' sons, specifically in LA, Christian and Justin, they were handcuffed and they were led out of the home as investigators from Homeland Security went in to collect the evidence. 30-year-old Justin is Combs' oldest biological son, who he had with a fashion designer named Misa Hilton. And Justin's mother shared a video from the Los Angeles raid on her Instagram page, and the footage, which appears to come from security cameras around the home, has been edited and sped up in places. And she writes, quote, "The overzealous and overtly militarized force used against my sons Justin and Christian is deplorable. If these were the sons of a non-black celebrity, they would not have been handled with the same aggression." Christian, by the way, celebrated his birthday 1 week after the raids, posting photos of his lavish celebrations on his Instagram story. And he also posted this to his story: "Stop with the blue cap emoji." Cap is slang for lying. And then on April 4th, Grace O'Markey filed her civil lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court. So that timeline I find is really interesting, Natalie. You have the raids. There have been lawsuits that have already discussed either one or two of these sons, but then her lawsuit comes after the raids, after everyone saw them in handcuffs. So what do you make of the remarks of Misa Hilton? What do you make of the fact of what Sean Combs' son posted on Instagram, and also the timing of the Grace O'Markey lawsuit?
Yeah, so first of all, about Misa Hilton's statement, all I have to say is cry me a river, to say that this has anything to do with race when Bernie Madoff's entire family was decimated by his, grift and Ponzi scheme that he was running on the New York elite. His sons were raided as well in public, and they were grown men, just like how Misa Hilton's son is a grown man, and all of Diddy's sons are adult men, 26 and up into their 30s. And so, unfortunately, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But when law enforcement is doing a raid on allegations of sex trafficking, gun ownership, and moving drugs across state lines, they're going to come in with force, given the nature of the case. And I'll say one last thing on Misa Hilton. She didn't have anything to say for the alleged victims of Sean Combs' crimes, in particular Cassie, where he is on video severely beating her. So the video there's never been a statement or outcry by Misa Hilton or any of Sean Combs' paramours that have said that they feel any sympathy for Cassie or what she went through. So again, cry me a river. As far as Justin or whichever son having his birthday party immediately after the raid, I think it exemplifies the type of bubble that these people live in that allowed for these crimes allegedly to go on for so long without being checked by the powers that be. Because who else could be raided by the federal government and the very next week be having a lavish birthday party, right? That comes from a certain level of financial privilege that they have that places them outside of the paradigm of what everyday people like my clients have to deal with. As to your third question about the timing of the lawsuit, I think it goes right along with what you asked me about at the top, which was her attorney's statement. These types of things where you see that the government is intervening, it's almost like before that, a lot of victims of crimes are under a type of gaslighting by the public, by society, by their own family members, that they shouldn't try to hurt this successful man who's done so much for his community. Because remember, he's also a philanthropist. He's also a mogul. He's also a leader. and that people really looked up to. And I'm sure that many people were discouraged from speaking out against him. And now that he has been federally indicted, some of that armor is gone, and people probably feel more comfortable with coming forward.
So let's get into this civil lawsuit. We did a sidebar on this in the past, but I kind of want to reiterate. So Omarky says that she had worked as a steward on the yacht that Sean Combs had rented. She was in charge of providing food and drinks for a 12-hour period. She was 25 years old at the time. And she believes and claimed that the alcohol on that yacht had been laced with drugs, because she says women would have one drink, then almost immediately pass out or start falling over. And again, if you go back to the indictment, there were allegations that Combs had been drugging people during the course of these freak-offs. But Omarky says that Christian Combs had been staying at a villa on the shore, but then would come onto the yachts on the evenings to party. And on December 28th, 2022, Christian, according to her, reportedly arrives very intoxicated and pressured Omarky to take shots of tequila. So she does, and Christian allegedly tries to get her to drink more in the yacht's makeshift recording studio. And she claims that Christian kissed her neck and face as he groped her legs, breasts, and private areas. Now, Omarky reportedly told Christian, "Excuse me, you don't touch my legs like that. I'll move my legs where I want to. If I want to do this, then I will. You don't touch my legs like that." Omarky then says that she told Christian she couldn't stay with him unless it was approved by a supervisor. So her complaint says that she knew all of them would be asleep by this time, and this was just kind of a ruse to get out of the situation. But she claims, what did Christian do? He said, "Okay, who can I talk to? I'm going to say I requested you right now." Omarky then says that she responded with, "Well, you can take your hand off my ass for the first thing." Now, Omarky says that she tried to go back to work, but Christian found her again, wanted her to find him a place to sleep for the night. So she took him to the cinema room of the yacht, and that's when she claims Christian kept her from leaving, groped her, took off all of his clothes, and tried to force her to perform oral sex on him. And she says that she was unable to fight him off until someone came in. Now, the lawsuit goes on to say that Omarky told the yacht captain what had happened the next day, and not only did he not believe her, that he didn't do any sort of investigation. She says that the captain even retaliated against her for months after the alleged assault before firing her in May of 2023. The civil complaint also includes photos of apparent bruises on Omarky's arms, which she says were caused by Christian Combs. And in this civil suit, she accuses him of assault, battery, sexual assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Now, Natalie, before I get into the allegations surrounding Sean Combs, because he is a named defendant too, what do you make of those allegations?
Well, I think it's a very serious allegation, and one that's interesting for the corroboration that it could or could not have. Her employer would be liable for not protecting her after she makes an outcry that she's been assaulted on their yacht. And so I'm not sure if they would be willing to come forward and corroborate what she said. But I do understand that the evidence also includes a recording from the recording studio of her resisting Mr. Combs. And so I think what this lays out is something that many people, or women in particular, are familiar with, which is sexual harassment in the workplace, especially in these industries that have softer HR, such as entertainment, travel, management, hotel, hospitality, those types of employments where you come into contact with wealthy individuals who feel like they can do basically whatever they want because they paid for it. And so nothing that she's saying sounds outside the realm of possibility. It's just a matter of corroboration. And if what she says is proven to be true, that is physical assault, sexual assault, harassment, everything of that nature. And so we'll see what the evidence shows when they do the discovery process.
Long before he was hit with multiple lawsuits accusing him of sexual assault, he dated the famous pop star and actress, reportedly from 1999 to 2001. Their first public appearance was September 1999 at the MTV Music Awards. And the following year, when they were together, was where she wore that infamous Versace green dress at the Grammys. The couple were on red carpets together. They went to Combs' famous white party together. Big A-list couple. In fact, there is a photo of them together lying in a white bed with giant pillows. And in another photo, they're in that same bed with other people. And one clip that has actually surfaced recently is of the couple in the show MTV Diaries from 2000. And this is where Combs expressed his dissatisfaction with Lopez having to perform a kiss scene in one of her movies. And she confessed he has a problem with stuff like that. So it was a little odd, but something else interesting happened. You fast forward to 2015, they'd already broken up. And this is when Jennifer Lopez appeared on the Wendy Williams show back in 2015.
I was telling you that I could always see you getting back with Puffy in a little way.
I remember you said
Yes.
that. Yes.
Or in my mind.
Look at that. Look at.
Or in my mind, getting together permanently
Yeah, well,
with
first of all,
Pitbull.
right, Pitbull, it's crazy. Everybody came alive. They
Everybody
all
has-
had something to say.
Yeah, everybody has an opinion.
Yes, it's funny to me.
And then the cameras panned over to Lopez's mom, Guadalupe Lupe Rodriguez, who was in the audience, who has this kind of concerned look on her face, and she seems to mouth, "It's done." Okay. Now, we can't forget that Lopez and Combs' relationship was marked by one of the biggest controversies of his life. The infamous 1999 shooting outside of a New York City nightclub after an argument broke out that left 3 people injured. Lopez, Combs, and Combs' bodyguard, Anthony Jones, they were actually pursued by police after leaving the scene and were arrested. Stolen gun was found in the car. Lopez was detained for, I believe, 12 hours, but the charges were never pursued against her. Combs, though, Jones, and a man named Shine Barrow, who was a former Bad Boy rapper who was also there that night, they were arrested. They went on trial. Combs was accused of opening fire and then trying to bribe the driver of the car to take the fall for having the gun. Jones and Combs, they were acquitted of gun possession and bribery charges, but Barrow was convicted of assault and reckless endangerment for the shooting, and he was sentenced to 10 years in jail. In fact, Barrow has recently stated that Combs sent him to prison. Yeah, blamed him, said that he called witnesses to testify against him. And by the way, Lopez never showed up to the courthouse. She was named as a potential witness, but never ended up being called to testify. The pair ended up breaking up. And what's interesting about that is that Lopez and this shooting was referenced recently in one of the civil lawsuits that was filed against Sean Combs. This one is the sexual assault and sex trafficking lawsuit filed by Rodney Little Rod Jones. This is Combs' former producer. And Jones claimed that Combs showed off his guns to him at one point and bragged about shooting people, and that he confessed he was in fact responsible for that 1999 shooting outside of the nightclub. And he claimed that Combs told him that Lopez carried the gun into the club for him and passed the gun to him when he got into that altercation and the shots were fired. Jones claims that Combs forced his then artist Shine to be the fall guy, taking the blame for the shooting. And now all of that brings us to Lopez today. After these charges against Combs, what role could she play? To be clear, she's not listed. She's not mentioned in the indictment in any way or any of the government's letters from the prosecution to the judge where it was regarding bail. His bail has been denied twice, by the way. But there's been no reference actually in filings from the government about Jennifer Lopez. And she has not spoken out since the arrest of Sean Combs. But I want to talk about this. And for that, I want to bring on former prosecutor Ava Sullivan to talk more about this. Ava, thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let me first ask you the main question I ask everybody in the past week. Your thoughts on the arrest and indictment of Sean Combs.
How the mighty have fallen. It is unbelievable. I remember when I was in high school, Sean Pitty Combs was like the guy everybody wanted to be. And I mean, kids emulated him. And to see now that he's charged with such egregious charges, trafficking, and everything else, it's completely unbelievable.
Was there anything in the indictment that surprised you? Was there anything missing from the indictment that you expected to see in it?
One of the things that surprised me is when you read the first line, it says that his activity has been going on for decades. Yeah. But then the charges are from 2008 to 2023, 2024. So it seems that it's been going on for a long time. This is a long time coming that he's been engaging in the activity, but perhaps the prosecutors only have enough evidence for 2008 to 2023 period of time.
That's so interesting. And I want to talk about J-Lo for a second because, you know, first let me ask you this question. As we're talking about celebrities and we're talking about Jennifer Lopez, so many people who were affiliated with him, who went to his parties, who had this connection, they haven't issued statements like, this is abhorrent. I condemn all of this. I didn't know about anything. You're seeing it a little bit, but not on a grand scale. I remember when Harvey Weinstein was criminally charged, or even when those accusations came out from the New York Times piece. There were people who celebrities came forward and said, I remember his party. You know, I remember talking to him. He always said these things. You heard rumblings of it. You're hearing that much less now with Sean Combs. And the question I keep getting asked is, why? Why are you not hearing more from celebrities? Why are they staying silent? Why do you think that is?
I think there's a big difference between P. Diddy's situation and Weinstein. In Weinstein, a lot of the women came forward and talked about the fact that they were victims, or he inappropriately, made advances to them. But here, if you're attending P. Diddy's parties, I think Ashton Kutcher in one feed was saying, yeah, his parties. Oh, let me tell you about them. Let me think about them. They're wild. Guilty by association. Nobody wants to touch that with a 10-foot pole if you're a celebrity.
And to be clear, not guilty in a court of law, like
no,
because
of
you
course
can go to
not.
a party and not commit a crime.
Right.
You just were around it. And the question was it an open secret?
But you're guilty by association
Right.
in the court of public opinion,
Correct.
right? Yeah. If it comes out that you were attending his parties, everyone's naturally going to think, what were you doing at that party? What was your involvement? Were you involved in the freak-offs? Did you engage in it? It would be a PR nightmare.
I do wonder, because the government said that they've spoken with over 50 witnesses and victims as of right now. That number could potentially grow because they say this investigation's ongoing, and I'm sure you can agree that when there is an indictment, sometimes more people come forward and will cooperate with the government. Maybe they feel that they're concerned about charges coming. Do you think that those conversations are happening behind the scenes? Do you think celebrities right now, through their legal teams, are meeting with prosecutors and giving information?
Absolutely. This P. Diddy's conduct was going on for decades, over 10 years, we know for sure. So it's very likely that the prosecutors are meeting with people, building their case, and it may be the situation where the prosecutors actually don't want celebrities to reveal any information, because it could be a situation where in court, it really tanks your case. If, let's say, hypothetically, you had Ashton Kutcher or someone say, yeah, I was attending the freak-offs during these period of times. This is the conduct I observed. He makes that statement in the media. Mm-hmm. Then when prosecutors are preparing for that case, well, the defense has great cannon fodder for cross-examination.
Right.
Let's say Ashton Kutcher makes that statement a year before the case goes. The defense now has a year to think about how they're going to cross-examine that witness.
Fair.
And that could make the case a lot worse for the government.
Or if he says something in the media that's contradicted by something that he said at another time. The question I would have is, celebrities are very private, obviously. Is there a situation where the government maybe got information from high-profile celebrities, but they will not reveal during the course of this investigation or even at a trial that they got that information from celebrity A or celebrity B? Like, in other words, they can get information from witnesses, but they don't necessarily have to call them as witnesses at a trial. They can use that information to find further evidence, right? So there's a chance, correct me if I'm wrong, that they may have spoken with celebrities, but we'll never know that those conversations happened.
Absolutely. Like, if you look at the indictment itself, it's 14 pages. But what we don't see is there could be all the videotapes, any cell phone records, countless documents that they looked at in order to put together those 14 pages, as well as countless witness interviews. There's always a mountain of evidence in order to get to that point where you have an indictment.
I want to ask you something as a former prosecutor. If you wanted to interview Jennifer Lopez, how do you do it without anybody knowing? There's paparazzi all the time. You call her into your office, people are going to be seeing it, especially now. Everybody knows what I would imagine. There's cameras set up outside the U.S. Attorney's office. You go to her house, why are agents showing up to her house? How do you get information from a celebrity like this?
We're talking about the SDNY here. It's a high-profile prosecutor's office that is used to dealing with politicians, celebrities. They have mechanisms and things in place, I'm sure, to be able to interview J-Lo without the paparazzi and anybody knowing. I mean, you could probably get her in a blacked out car, take her, whether it's a loading dock or some designated area where people would not suspect a celebrity would drive into, have your agents meet her, take her up into a secret room, and have a conversation with her.
Going back to this at hand, over the years, Combs has shown off his mansions, his cars, his wardrobe, and of course, what we're going to talk about right now, his private jets.
My first time in this thing.
It's gonna be better once some stuff is swapped.
Smell of newness. Fresh mahogany.
So we have this Gulfstream, a G550. It was registered by Love Air LLC sometime in 2020 or 2021. And here's a question. Is there more to that plane or another plane that meets the eye? Could that plane be a source of evidence of anything that Combs is accused of now? Will there be flight manifests that provide information about high-profile people who were on that plane, potential sex workers that were on that plane, alleged accusers on that plane? Because it's important when we talk about sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution, these kinds of charges, there is an element of transporting people over state or international lines. So there is a lot to sort out when it comes to Sean Combs and planes and what was happening in the sky. So for that, I want to bring on aviation attorney Justin T. Green. Justin, thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me.
So my first question for you is, and my understanding is there are websites where you can track both public and private aircrafts, but according to the Flight Aware site, you can't track Combs' jet at the request of the owner or operator. And TMZ reports that being unable to track this all-black jet is actually a relatively new development. Can you talk to us about that?
It really isn't for some celebrities who may have a legitimate reason that their jets not be tracked. I can't imagine if Taylor Swift were going to fly into Westchester Airport, how many people would be meeting her there if they were able to track her jet. So I don't think that's the biggest thing. And the operator is required to keep a flight log that would actually indicate, at least where the airplane took off to and where it went. In fact, the operators required to keep certain records by federal regulations, but many of the records may no longer exist because the only one that they have to keep is the flight log.
Now the question is, could Love Air have anything to do with those allegations? In fact, when Combs' mansions in Miami and Los Angeles were raided back in March, there was rampant speculation that Combs had actually fled the country. Turned out to not be true. While Combs was spotted at the Opa-locka airport in Miami that day, his jet was in Antigua, allegedly coming from California. Now, it's unclear who might have been on board. Justin, here's my question to you. How do you know who is on his plane, when they were on the plane? What kind of information, what kind of records are there?
So the records that an operator has to keep include the itinerary for its flights, the flight log that I just mentioned before, and I think most importantly for the purposes of this conversation, a passenger manifest, who is on board, the souls on board. Now, the problem is that once the airplane is finished with its flights, they have to keep these records for 90 days, except for the flight log that they have to maintain. So it is possible that a operator after 90 days could discard the passenger manifest, in which case you wouldn't know who was on the airplane over 3 months ago. Now, the big issue is there's absolutely no reason. Most of these documents are kept electronically. There'd really be no reason to delete the passenger manifest. And if they go into the records and they find missing records, I think that's going to be a red flag for the investigators.
It's a really good point. Just to put a bow on that, how much information do the logs provide?
The logs are just honestly nothing that's going to really amount. You'll know what time the airplane took off. You know how much fuel was on board. You'll know basic information about the flight, where it went to, where it came from. but it's not going to necessarily give you what happened on the airplane, who was on the airplane. The passenger manifest will tell you who's on it. You know, one point, and obviously the Jeffrey Epstein saga, you know, the crimes that were committed with the use of his airplane, you know, is really top of mind. But one thing that everyone has to realize is that anyone who's on that airplane, if it's a vulnerable person, they're stuck there. It's kind of you know, they can't get out of there until the airplane lands and deplanes. So people on board a private jet are in a very vulnerable position to a bad actor. So I think that's something the investigators have to consider.
Combs' access to a private airplane, it came up because it was a point of concern during his arraignment in the Southern District of New York, because his defense team addressed that in a letter to the judge where they were arguing for a bond. And the letter says, quote, since at least April 2024, Mr. Combs has, and by the way, that is after the raids, Mr. Combs has been making efforts to sell his airplane. We informed the government of these efforts in May of 2024. Just this weekend, Mr. Combs entered into a letter of intent with a party to sell it. Mr. Combs understands he is not to travel to Los Angeles, where the plane had been located this week, and further, that the plane is not to be brought to any district in which he is located until it is sold. Over the past several months, there have been several potential buyers for the airplane, and at least 2 buyers have signed a letter of intent to purchase the aircraft. Due to the nature of this asset and the amount of inspection and due diligence that is required for purchase, it is not a simple asset to offload. So Justin, clearly it seems to me tough to sell a plane from that point of view, but I also thought it was interesting where they were making kind of a promise that he's not going to be with his plane. He's not going to be a risk of flight.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously it's much easier for someone to get out of the country if they have a private plane. Someone, especially depending on, I guess, the integrity of the operator. If, you know, he would be able to get out of the country and go very quickly to a place that might not be able to bring him back to face the charges that he's facing.
Can I just amplify that point a little bit? Because I've been asked that question a lot. Why didn't he just take off on his private jet and leave? That there is a difficulty there, right? It's not as simple as someone would make it out to be, especially if law enforcement got wind of that. They could have immediately arrested him. Just briefly explain to us why that was more. You know, you see it in the movies, and sometimes you see it in real life, but why is it not so simple to just jump on a plane, take off, go to a country that doesn't extradite you?
Well, it's certainly not difficult to jump on an airplane, but I imagine if he went to an airport and he presented his passport to go to another country, he would have not gotten on that airplane. The FBI would have picked him up. In his private jet, I'm sure they were watching to see where he was going. But just in terms, you know, this is not really an aviation issue, but you're talking about having to go to a country, say Russia, that is going to not send you back to the U.S. based on a request, and you become a kind of a prisoner of that country. Moreover, he would be leaving, you know, all or probably a lot of his assets, certainly not all, but a lot of his assets behind. So I don't think it's a particularly attractive option. You know, life in exile, especially in a country that is not going to return you to the U.S., it's not like you can go and live in Paris or London, is not a great choice.
Counter argument to that would be federal prison. But let me ask you this. If this was a key piece of evidence, right? If this plane was a key piece of evidence in this case, would the government even allow Sean Combs to sell it?
Well, you know, the question that I had when you were asking me the question was whether the airplane itself is a crime scene, whether some of the activities that he is, you know, being accused of occurred on the airplane, in which case I think it's something, you know, kind of a CSI question, whether there's evidence, you know, putting aside the manifest, putting aside the flight log, and putting aside the flight planning documents, anything else that, you know, is likely available, whether there's actual evidence of misconduct in the fibers on the rugs, you know, on the carpeting of that airplane or elsewhere. So that's really a question for the FBI.
Now, wanted to ask you something else about this letter. So it says, in advance of the plane being sold, this is again the defense's letter on bail, in advance of the plane being sold, which it eventually will be, we have agreed to keep the airplane in Los Angeles while Mr. Combs resides in his home in Florida if it is not being chartered. Coincidentally, and not at Mr. Combs' request, last night, the airplane was chartered on a Part 135 flight from Los Angeles to Teterboro, New Jersey. Mr. Combs had no advance knowledge of the flight, nor did he possess any control over its movement last night. Obviously, Mr. Combs agrees to not go to any state, in this case New Jersey, in which his airplane is located pending its sale, which is actively being pursued. And my understanding is Part 135 refers to a certificate from the FAA for private planes. What did you make of that? Yeah, what did you make of that?
Well, I mean, it sounds like they're chartering the airplane out. So somebody who wants to charter it for a flight here from California to Teterboro could basically just pay for it, and the operator will operate it. And Sean just owns the airplane, doesn't know, Mr. Combs owns the airplane, doesn't know anything about it. The problem I have is once it's in Teterboro, it's pretty damn close to where he's at. So I think that's, once it's off charter, he still owns the airplane. So an hour away by car, if he was out, he'd be in Teterboro with his airplane.
One of the things that I've always wondered, if he was trying to sell the plane, how much would he get for it? So I was thinking, if he's trying to sell it, might need the funds to pay for all of these legal expenses. He has a lot of legal exposure right now, being sued by multiple people. He's now going to have to fight this criminal case. How much could you get for a private airplane?
I mean, I'd have to look it up, but the first thing I would do if I bought that airplane is go to the FAA and ask them to change its side number. So that you're flying around with the same N number, we call it, that Mr. Combs flew around with. But I don't think it has any less or better value than any other airplane. But I would not want to be flying around with the same N number, the FAA's number for the airplane.
So, by the way, back in late March, this was, again, I believe after the raids, TMZ was reporting that all of the companies that Combs used to charter flights, that they were going to receive subpoenas. It seems, investigators wanted to know who connected with Combs, had flown at his expense, maybe look for potential victims, witnesses that can confirm or deny some of these allegations. But Justin, interestingly, I didn't see anything in the indictment or in the government's letters regarding bail where they mentioned subpoenaing charter companies or getting information about the plane or planes. Nothing about that. And it makes me wonder, were these charter companies actually subpoenaed? Was there any information that was relevant that was obtained? And the fact that it wasn't mentioned, I don't know if it's going to be part of the criminal case, but it was interesting for me to see that and try to determine whether or not this plane is relevant to the case.
Yeah, I think it depends on what records they kept. Now, they should have kept the itinerary for all the flights. They should have kept the flight log. Honestly, even though they don't legally have to, they should have the passenger manifest, the weight and balance, the flight plans, and any of the dispatch records. So the investigators would have a decent package, assuming all those documents are available. In which case, now they have the witnesses. So now they have who was on each flight, who were the pilots, maybe more importantly, who were the flight attendants, who were the passengers. And I imagine this may just be like Epstein, where people hope that they are not on any of these manifests because they may be, I'm not saying they did anything wrong, but that they may be subject to being interviewed by the FBI about what happened on each particular flight.
The former member of the girl group Danity Kane, she filed a lawsuit on September 10th claiming that Combs sexually and verbally abused her for a decade. She also claimed that Combs owes her more than $3 million in unpaid salary and royalties, as well as unpaid wages for touring. And in her lawsuit, it says, quote, in or around November 2009, after the Soul Train Awards in Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Combs flew Miss Richard and Miss Harper to his house in New York on his private jet for an after party. There were many well-known celebrities at the after party, and copious amounts of illegal drugs were being openly consumed. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs had arranged for dozens of young women and girls, some of whom appeared to be underage, to be transported to the party. So again, just going full circle, we can see why the plane plays such an important role, not only in these civil cases, but if we're talking about sex trafficking and we're talking about transportation of people, it's important in the criminal case.
Yeah, like you said it on the outset, they're taking people from one part of the country across state lines to another part, and it facilitates whatever crime occurred at that party was facilitated by his use of this jet. So obviously a lot remains to be seen in the litigation, in the prosecution, and also the civil cases. But the jet is a key piece of evidence here.
Justin, thank you so much for coming on. Again, really appreciate your time. Justin Green, we look forward to speaking with you again.
Anytime. Thanks a lot.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.